Hello everyone, and welcome to Restoring Ostergotland. Well, what's this all about then? In early January of 2024, I had some email correspondence with Charles Stewart Grant, and Charles is the son of the late and famous Charles Grant, who wrote The War Game, which was first published in 1971. Previous to that, he'd actually published Battle Practical Wargaming, which came out in 1970, but that focused on World War II gaming. But The War Game in 1971 was the book that I kind of imprinted on. This is what set the tone for my wargaming hobby pretty much for the rest of my life. Anyway, Charles had contacted me because he was having a clear out. He's in the process of updating, modernising his own collection of figures and terrain. And he still had some of the original balsa wood buildings that had featured in his father's book. And he asked me if I'd like them, because he obviously is aware that I've been a champion of what we now call old school wargaming for many years. And he thought that I might be an appropriate person to take over the collection for posterity. As it happens, along with the buildings, there were some figures as well, old plastic Spencer Smith figures that dated back to the mid-late 1960s. Because when you think those figures had appeared in The War Game, which was published in 1971, and as anyone who's been published knows, including myself, the lead-in time between when the book's actually published and when it had to be produced, and then when it had to be written and the photographs taken, would mean that these figures would have appeared and been on the Grant's wargaming table definitely in the late 1960s. And so they're very old and very fragile, and particularly the plastic Spencer Smith miniatures, which were cast back in the day in quite an odd plastic. Ronald W. Spencer Smith, who created the range, I think did most of his work in a garden shed, and goodness knows what sort of chemistry went into the plastic that he created to mould the famous Spencer Smith range of figures, because over time the plastic seems to have kind of oxidized and become very brittle, particularly around ankles and where muskets join bodies and that kind of thing, as you will see. So anyway, the opening photograph that's the parcel that arrived here in Hove a couple of weeks ago, and then I took out the contents, and just to show you the book open at the appropriate pages and the buildings that appeared on the front cover and inside the book, there they are, together with that regiment, that battalion of Spencer Smith miniatures in dark blue coats, which turned out to be the Ostergotland Regiment. And I'm particularly pleased to have managed to got hold of those, because Charles had actually previously sold off all the rest of his Spencer Smith miniatures collection. So all the other miniatures that had appeared in the War Game and some of Charles's other books of his own, CSG Grant's books, they'd already gone. So I'm particularly pleased to have been able to get hold of one of the original battalions. Alongside that battalion of miniatures, it's a big battalion, 48 miniatures plus officers. That's the style of old school wargaming, particularly the Grant's own rules that appeared in the War Game. Alongside those were some personality figures as well. The first one, as you can see, is a chap in a clerical outfit, and that turned out to be none other than the Prince Bishop of Langensalza, which is obviously a creation that Charles Grant himself had made, based, I believe, on one of the Spencer Smith artillery figures. And anyone out there who's got any of the Spencer Smith miniatures will probably recognise that figure as being based on one of the artillerymen in the Spencer Smith range. There are also a couple of other chaps who are conversions. Now, these, I think, were conversions from actually not the 18th century range, but from the American Civil War range. There was a mounted officer in the American Civil War range that I could see would probably make a good basis for these chaps. And we believe that originally this was the Duc de Gramont, who was one of the Lorraine figures. For those of you who know the story in the book, the background to the book, there was the Grand Duchy of Lorraine and the Vereinigte Freistädte. So the chap in red is the Duc de Gramont, and he's accompanied by an official from the electorate of the Vereinigte Freistädte, the chap with the white stick. Now, those were both suffering from flaky paint, and in fact, the Duc de Gramont, when he arrived, his right arm had fallen off in transit. And so the next picture, you can see that I've fixed him, and also there were a couple of infantry figures that had snapped off at the ankle, and I fixed those as well with the judicious use of super glue. Now, as I went through the restoration process, they weren't the only breakages, I can tell you. Some of the plastic was very, very fragile and brittle indeed. But in any case, that's enough by way of introduction. And what I've done is record, as I was actually doing the restoration work, I put together a series of short video clips that I've strung together to show you the kind of beginning to end process of the conservation and restoration process for the grant collection that I've carried out. And the bottom line is I wanted to be able to use these figures and buildings. I'm not just keeping them in a glass cabinet somewhere, partly because I don't have room for a glass cabinet. Where I work in my converted attic space, there is no room for glass cabinets. So things end up in actually a variety of really useful boxes, if you know the really useful box range. So they first had to be repaired and conserved, and my intention is definitely to use them, starting in the very near future, in my own games. So they needed to be robust enough to endure being used again, as well as respecting their heritage. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video clips, and thanks for watching. Hi everyone, I thought I'd give you a little behind the scenes today. Whatever the date is, I'm not sure. What is it? The 11th of January, I think it is. Because obviously, you know, I've just received all those lovely buildings and some old Spencer Smith miniatures from Charles Grant. And so they're all down here. Let me tilt the camera so you can see my work table a bit. They're all, here they are. The Ostergotland infantry. And so what I'm doing is a conservation job, because obviously these were originally painted with, I imagine, Humbrol enamels. And a lot of them have got paint, little bits of paint flaking off them and stuff. And so what I want to do is stabilize the surface. You can see, for example, if you look, if you can see there, the ankles of this chap, you can see the brown plastic showing through where the enamel paint on his gaiters has started to flake off. And there were a couple of figures like this one that were actually broken at the ankles, so I've super glued them back together. Unfortunately it worked. It doesn't always work, because Ronald Spencer Smith had some interesting chemical concoctions for his plastics, and sometimes super glue just goes, no, not interested. But fortunately, in this case, it has. So anyway, what I'm doing is I am, with a very, very soft brush, for each figure, checking it over. That's the first thing. Giving it a very light soft brush to get rid of any dust, because obviously these have been used for war games for donkey's years, and I doubt they've ever been dusted. So I just want to make sure that I get rid of any potential surface dust. And obviously they're all singly based, and what I'm going to do is, because I want to use these, so I am taking them off the single bases, as you'll see, and I'm going to then mount them onto the multiple bases I use for my own shot, steel and stone rules. So what this means is, for each figure, very carefully, I provide a, let's move these chaps out the way. Go on, chaps, move out the way. I provide a soft landing area in the form of just a folded bit of kitchen roll. And very carefully with a scalpel, I just tease the figure off its card base, but by slipping the scalpel in underneath, wiggling it about a bit. Because they've been painted on these individual bases as well, obviously there's the paint adhering them as well as any glue that might be underneath. But anyway, and then you hear a nice little kind of crackly noise as the glue starts to free up, and very gently, there we go, the blade's going underneath, very gently wiggle that along and ease it off its base. And it's been, might be Yoo-hoo glue or something like that was used originally, so it's still a bit gummy in places. And that now can go in the bin, clean off that last little bit of glue, and there we are. We've got an individual figure, which I put with the group over there. And so once I've done that with all of these, let me do another one just to demonstrate. Very light dust. Yeah, you can see under here that paint's been flaking off the, can you see under the musket there? That's quite common. So just make sure that that's lightly dusted, so any paint that's going to flake off will flake off at this point and just fall down onto the tissue. And again, I'll get my scalpel. It's a bit like repair shop, isn't it, folks? A mini repair shop. So get my scalpel, ease that gently along, and he was ready to come off anyway. There we go. And also you can see the different colours of plastic that Ronald W. Spencer Smith used. So we've got brown, we've got grey. Oh, there's a red one there. What colour's he? He's another brown one. Most of the ones I've got are brown. Oh, that looks like it's actually black plastic. I've not seen a black plastic before. I know sometimes he uses a very dark blue. What colour's that one? That's another red one. The officer, another black one. Interesting. So he, I don't know, did he just add some kind of colour additive to the batches of plastic he made up? I will never know. Mr. Spencer Smith is long gone. But anyway, there you are. That's the process I'm undergoing. I've already done a bit of restoration on this officer figure as well. I think Charles said that's the Duc de Gramont. And here we've got, he's waiting for his full conservation. This is the Prince Bishop of Langensalza. Whoa, don't do that, Henry. They're quite brittle. There we are with his crook. The Prince Bishop of Langensalza. That's a Grant original conversion. The sooner I get these things on their own proper basis, the better. But there we are. Marvellous. So, okay, I'm going to sign off for now and go ahead and do this. And then the next stage is to seal in all that old enamel paint. What I'm going to do is give them a very light dilute coat of PVA white glue, because then that shrinks and dries completely clear and forms a kind of layer of varnish protection over the figures, and also helps to preserve the original plastic that they're cast in and prevent it kind of oxidizing any further. I've done that with a lot of my own older Spencer Smiths. So anyway, I'm going to sign off for now, and I'll catch up with you later when I start the next stage. And so, after a lot of breath holding and a couple of sets of broken ankles, I did mention that these figures probably date back to the late 1960s, very early 1970s. There they are. They're all dusted now. Any repairs that needed doing have been done in terms, physical repairs, super gluing, and they have been taken off their individual bases. And so now we just need to get them coated with a thin coat of PVA to conserve the surface that's already there, and let them dry before I then move on to actually doing some restoration of paintwork, and then thereafter mounting them on multiple bases. So here we are. This is the result of my labours so far. Hi again. Right, you've caught me now. I'm in the process of applying a very dilute coat of, this is actually the Bacchus PVA glue that comes with their terrain kit, but it's already quite a thin PVA white glue, but I've diluted that by another kind of 1/3 to 50% in my palette here, and I'm just picking up the figures one by one and just with a very soft brush just sploshing it all over. I know it looks like, oh my god, he's putting a lot on. Actually, I'm not. And once it dries, it dries completely transparent. But what this is doing, it's kind of going to form a skin that shrinks onto the figure and stabilizes the layers that are already there. In fact, there's on this figure I'm working on now, there's a bit down by the ankles there where you can see the enamel paint had flaked off. So by adding this extra layer now, that's going to prevent any more of that from happening, and so the original paint will be kind of encapsulated underneath any other layers that I then paint on top. So that's a dozen of them done. I've just got another 36 to do, and I've done the officers and stuff over here already, and the bishop's been coated. So I'll check in again later once these are all done. So here's the Ostergotland regiment, having been given a coat of diluted PVA, and they're doing a sort of open order parade at this stage with the Prince Bishop of Langensalza in attendance, and the Duke de Gramont, and I think Charles said that the chap with the stick is something to do with the authorities of the electorate of the Vereinigte Freistädte in his army. So I'll have to give that chap a role in my own setup. So as you can see, it's kind of looks, the bases look a bit shocking, don't they? You've got little puddles of PVA, but that's fine because it's all run down from their upper bodies, obviously, because it's very, very dilute. But that'll dry in no time at all, and it dries completely transparent, as in fact you can already see sort of on some of them that are heading towards being completely dry. So it's just given it a nice kind of semi-matte kind of varnish, effectively sealing in all the old paintwork, and that's also now providing me with a surface for as an undercoat, basically, for when I go in to do the paintwork repairs / restoration. But anyway, there we go. So there's nothing I can do now apart from go away and leave those to dry, which might be, I might leave them until tomorrow. Anyway, hope you're enjoying this, folks. There you go. That's the Ostergotland Regiment that was formerly in the possession of Charles Grant and his son Charles S. Grant, as featured in the book The War Game in 1971. Hi again, I just thought I'd check in to show you that I'm doing exactly the same thing with the buildings that I got as part of the consignment from Charles. The buildings, these really old fragile buildings with the ruins inside. He was famous for having ruins inside. This I think is part of Dover Cathedral or something, which is a two-part edifice. But you can see I have in fact dusted them, even though they look really dusty. But they've just been painted with kind of washes of enamels, I would guess, back in the day, or maybe even watercolours or something, not sure. But they come apart, and you can see from inside they're made from balsa wood. And again, you can see that already over time, some little bits have snapped off and so on. So I'm doing exactly the same thing, giving them a good dust, and I'm giving them a coat of thinned white glue, PVA adhesive. I think in America you call it Elmer's glue, something like that, just to make sure that it stabilizes the original paint surface. And also, of course, it will have the effect of helping to strengthen them. You know, if there's been any joints that have started to come apart or anything like that, the glue will get in there and will set hard and give the whole thing extra strength. So again, looks a bit scary when you first apply it, but you just have to take an act of faith, and with a reasonably sized brush, but very soft, so because I don't want to knock anything off, just kind of get in there on all the big surfaces, and particularly, and of course, in amongst nooks and crannies, that sort of thing. This cathedral is quite an incredible piece of miniature architecture, actually. And clearly, Charles Grant, I don't know if I need to ask Charles Stewart Grant, did your dad actually make plans for these, or did he just put them together by eye as he went along? Because they're quite amazing little pieces of building. Really impressive. I don't think I would have attempted anything this elaborate. Of course, what's quite interesting, for considering that his two countries were the Grand Duchy of Lorraine and die Vereinigte Freie Städte, which are very obviously European, kind of mainland European names, it's interesting that he decided to go for some British, rather Norman architecture and Gothic architecture to use in his games. Some sort of, probably his own sense of humour. Oh yes, wouldn't it be funny if in these games supposedly set in Europe, actually people could go, hang on a minute, isn't that Dover Cathedral? Really interesting. But yes, my admiration of the man is increased in the process of just acquiring these bits and pieces and looking at how they've been made out of bits and bobs of balsa wood and card and some little bits of hardboard and that kind of stuff. Really impressive. And also, as I've mentioned before, the fact that they're not built to the same scale as the miniatures. Well, you can see over here, can't you, that here's the 30mm miniatures, but the buildings behind. So the miniatures, what's 30mm? It's about 1/56th scale, something like that, 1/54th, something like that. But the buildings are a much smaller scale, smaller even, I think, than HOOO, which is 1/72nd, 1/76th. I think these are probably more like 1/87th, which was the scale of the Roco mini tanks that I know that he used for his first book. Battle Practical Wargaming, which actually first appeared as a series of articles in Meccano magazine back in, what would that have been? That was probably in the late 60s, 68, 69, and the book Battle Practical Wargaming actually came out in 1970. That was his first book. And the War Game, which is the one that I first discovered, that came out in 1971. So actually, it's a really interesting journey of discovery about, gosh, yes, why did he choose to make these particular buildings? There are some others, as you'll see later, that are very much more European in design, much more kind of Alsatian, in fact, because obviously the Grand Duchy of Lorraine, Alsace-Lorraine, is that part of the bordering lands between Germany and France, isn't it? So they've got much more that kind of white-walled, red-roofed architecture. But yes, here we are applying some reinforcing protective PVA to what I think is Dover Cathedral. So yeah, this is a very interesting process. So I've gone in amongst all these, I don't know what these bits are. I'll have to look up what these bits are called, that are kind of the roof buttressy things. Anyway, nearly done. Just a bit around this side on this one. There we go. So that's that. Just make sure I'm mopping up anything where the adhesive has pooled too much. There we are. I don't think I've missed anything on there. Lovely. So there's that one to join the other half of the edifice, and now just in the ruins. So again, I'm just going to quickly go over the base that goes around the ruin, like so. Because it doesn't need a very thick coat at all. It's the idea is, and anyway, I don't want it to be too thick because I don't want to actually end up obscuring anything. And it's interesting the way he's done the ruins. He's obviously he had a knack for doing this kind of thing. So I'm hoping that I'm going to do them justice and look after them properly for many years to come. And then at some point, when I'm not here anymore, they'll get passed on or sold on to someone else. So there we go. That'll soak in and dry out nicely, like so. There. So again, I've got a pile of buildings. Let me pick up this box. Here's all the other buildings in here. So I've got all these to do as well. Whilst I'm waiting for the figures to dry. So I'll probably get a couple of these done and then be able to move on with the figures. So hello everyone again, and here is my table up in the Luftwaffe, festooned with old school wargaming stuff, plus some old hammer you might notice over sort of to the centre right in front of my paints. But that's a different story. Right now I have just finished doing a coat of PVA on all the buildings, some of which I can now identify as probably having been made by Charles Père, the late Charles Grant, some of which were, I suspect, made more recently by Charles Stewart Grant. Some of them might have even been repairs of older buildings by him. But anyway, I'm just going to sweep over so you can see what's going on. There's the church. All the ruins obviously have been taken out and separately treated with the PVA. And obviously I haven't put them back together yet because I want to make sure that they're dry first, because otherwise they'll stick together and that would really be a disaster, wouldn't it? But anyway, so the ones that are on the left over there, I did earlier, and they're almost completely dry now. The ones on the green sort of cutting mat here I've done in the more recent session, and they're more wet. And you can also see that the ones on the cutting mat, several of them are clearly slightly different stylistically, less detailed. Clearly, I think Charles Grant, the senior, was a real demon for kind of putting little details and things, brickwork and roof tiles and all sorts of, look, I mean, look at them, they're amazing, really. Anyway, you'll have another look at them. In the meantime, you can also see that the infantry that I have dusted and repaired and now undercoated with PVA are looking very tidy already. They're already looking a lot better, and I'm much more confident now about being able to give them some touching up with paint and then another varnish over the top. I'll probably use a spray varnish at the end. But anyway, the original paint layer is now preserved for all time beneath this layer of PVA. So I'm really happy with how that's gone. So this is where we are at the moment, folks. So the next stage is going to be actually getting some paints out and doing some restoration, as having just done all the conservation. Hope you're enjoying it. Hi folks, another little update on where I am with the restoration conservation of the Spencer Smiths acquired from Charles Grant. Okay, this is where I am. I've done the thin coat of dilute PVA, as I think I told you last time, and they're all dried and looking lovely, and they're now, all the original paint layer is now protected underneath that. So now I'm looking at kind of very gentle, what's the word, sympathetic, that's the word, restoration of where paint bits are missing. And to that end, I've been doing some experiments. You can see that these guys, the Ostergotland regiment, I pick one up, I've got this kind of pink facings, which I think that's the old Humbrol colour that was known as Polish crimson. I don't know if you can see that. And it's not a colour I've got, a standard colour I've got in my collection of Vallejos or GWs or anything else for that matter. It's quite an interesting pink, but with a twang to it. Anyway, I think I've found the answer, which is using some Liquitex medium magenta, here we go, as a base starting point, and mixing it with a bit of Vallejo carne pallida, pale flesh, there we go, which is 72003. And you can see on the mixing palette, there's the original magenta, there's the carne pallida, here's the result. And if I hold up one of these guys, you can see that's pretty darn close. And it doesn't have to be exact, because I've been thinking about this, and it's probably only fair if I do what's called just an honest repair. So if these ever get passed on to someone else after I'm gone, they will be able to see what was the original and what wasn't. But anyway, it's pretty damn close, so I'd be happy to use that as my restoration colour. I haven't yet gone through and checked how much of it I'm going to need. What I am also doing is making, here's my little notebook. I always keep notes of what I'm doing, so you can see there's the blobs of paint, and explaining exactly what's going on. So if anyone got that regiment, they'll be able to get an image of, or maybe even pass on this entire notebook. We'll see, there's other stuff in here. All right. The other thing I've done is the Prince Bishop of Langensalza. Here he is. Let's bring my light a bit further over. There we go. Prince Bishop of Langensalza. I've mounted him on a base that's what, 30mm across, to reduce the amount of handling that the miniature will get, because they're old and fragile and goodness knows what. And in his case, I've only attached him with a bit of blue tack, well rubbed and massaged blue tack to make sure it's nice and sticky, so that this spacing is reversible for him, because on the underside of his base, I discovered when I was sorting him out, there's actually a little inscription by the late Charles Grant, making it clear that he is in fact the Prince Bishop of Langensalza. Charles Stewart Grant has replaced him with, was it a foundry miniature or something like that, that's had some work done. That appears in one of his more recent books about the Vulsa and Buttle Wars, or whatever what happened to be. So that's him. So he's only attached with a bit of blue tack, but that will keep him fine for, you know, he's not going to be used terribly much other than for civic occasions. And so I've just a bit of goblin green on the base, just giving it a first coat, and I'll give it another coat just to kind of tie it in. Now for the other two figures, mounted figures, we had what I've discovered was an election official or electorate official from the Vereinigte Freistädter, and what Charles seems to remember was the Duc de Gramont. Well, obviously that was for Charles's original Vereinigte Freistädter and the Grand Duchy of Lorraine. So they're going to be serving new purposes for me. So now this chap is going to be Andreas Filke, the Regierungsinspekteur of Borgenmark. So he's the government inspector of Borgenmark, a very powerful figure. So if he turns up, the generals will quicken their boots, because it's probably something to do with the budget. Are they exceeding the budget for the war? And here we've got the guy who was the Duc de Gramont, and he is now le Duc de Le Monde. Le Monde being a city up in northern Grand Nuits. Those of you who've been paying attention will know Le Monde is in northern Grand Nuits, right close to the border with Borgenmark. So very appropriate that a chap like him would get involved in the conflict that's brewing up between Borgenmark and Grand Nuits. As for the other chaps, you can see I've created a leadership base for the standard bearer and colonel and drummer, which is in accordance with my normal shot, steel and stone rules, and just the way I like the look of it. This is actually an idea, I think, that came from Peter Gilder's In the Grand Manner, but I like that look with this sort of leadership base that takes its place in the centre of the line, with the standard bearer and the colonel and the drummer and officers, senior NCOs and officers. So I've left gaps here for a couple more figures to pop in, but I've not putting them in yet because I still want to access these chaps for doing any restoration painting. And obviously if I've got it crowded with figures, then I won't be able to get a brush in there. But you can see there's, you know, a bit of damage on the paintwork of the horse that needs seeing to, and, you know, some infantry gaiters will need some attention and that kind of stuff. And then obviously I'll be painting the whole thing goblin green so it all ties in together. So that's the leadership base, and I've got a whole bunch of other bases because I mount my figures in multiples. So I've got 6s, I've got 3s, I've got 2s, and I've got 1s. And so they're going to follow the standard basing that I use for all my other units. But obviously, again, I'm holding off mounting them on there until I've given them a thorough check to see what needs potentially doing to the paintwork, and then an overall kind of varnish. Anyway, so that's where I am at the moment, and the next stage will be to really take a careful look at the paintwork on the infantry and see what needs touching up. And as I say, I've now discovered a suitable mix for that pink for their facings. Hi everyone again. Now it's time to touch up the black. Before I do the coloured facings, I've decided I'm going to do the black bits, which are primarily the gaiters. And there are a number of bits and pieces where the original black enamel paint has flaked off. Some are really, really tiny. You probably can't see here, but there's a tiny little bit down by this guy's foot. So I've just got some Vallejo black, undiluted, so it's a fairly nice thick coat, but not too thick. And this is just a Winsor & Newton Series 7 #1 brush, and I'm just going to very carefully, where I can see the black has come off, I am just going to gently touch in those areas. I don't want to do masses. There's some on the kind of seam edge there, tiny little bit down by the foot, another bit there. Yeah, so I'm not kind of doing fresh painting. I'm literally just going to plug the gaps where paint has very obviously flaked off, and give them a good look round, because as I'm sure you know, it's, oh, there's a bit, it's funny how your eyes can trick you if you don't pay attention. There's a little bit on his tricorn hat as well, I can see right there. And for him, at the moment, that'll probably do. Let's grab another one. How about an officer? Oh yeah, I can see that he's developed some gaiter problems as well. Tiny little bit there. What about on his sword scabbard? A little bit on his sword scabbard there, just on the ridge. Tiny bit there, that's thinned out a bit down by his heel. I can see that the Grants put gaiter buttons on using silver by the looks of things, and I will probably just leave those as they are. Let's check his hat. A little bit there. Okay, so this is just tiny touches I'm doing here. If their original paintwork was scruffy, that's not what I'm tidying up. Okay, that's part of the charm of the figures. No, it's only where I can see that the ravages of time have actually meant that the original enamel paint has flaked off. And this guy actually looks like he's pretty much okay. Let's check his hat. Yeah, I can see that. Yep, either Charles Senior or Junior had a bit of a wobbly line up there, but for the lace, but that doesn't matter. I'm literally now. I've just spotted one who's got a. Right, you can see here if I hold him closer to the camera. I don't know if there's enough light there. Probably. If I hold him here, you can see there's actually quite a lot of paint missing off his gaiters. That's, oh gosh, yes, there's a lot flaked off there. So that's where I can come in, and let's move the light over here a bit so you can see better. There's quite a lot of coverage I need to do there to plug the gaps. Just holding them carefully. Don't forget that I can be fairly relaxed about how I hold them now, because I have sealed everything in with that thin coat of PVA that kind of acts as a varnish in itself. Certainly seals in and protects the original paint surface, so I don't have to worry about more paint flaking off. But oh yes, that was quite a lot missing there. And up here by his hip, and down at the foot there, a little bit in between some of the gaiter buttons, a little bit down the back seam, a bit more there. There we go, that's rescued him. So I'm pleased about that. This is what this process is aimed at. So the same chap, let me check. Oh, there's a bit on his hat there. At the pointy bit. You just have to think about, okay, when these were being picked up and put down during the course of play, where did people grab them? Where was the paint most likely to wear off? And then famously, as described in the books, they used to scoop these things up because they weren't based at all. They used to scoop these things up and just chuck them in a box. And I've got one of the original boxes over on my shelf. Anyway, so that's the process I'm going through. So just very patiently, one by one, picking them up, checking them. Obviously, there's these ones that I've already fixed to a command base, and that means I can hold the base rather than the figures, where I'm going to be checking those thoroughly as well. So that will be the black done. There's going to be some work on muskets required, I can see, to sort those out and make them consistent. And then the last thing I'll probably do will be the pink facings, and then anything on their flesh, their hands, faces, that kind of stuff, though it looks as if that hasn't flaked off quite so badly. Okay folks, that's it for the moment. Hi again everyone. Okay, the next stage we're at with our little Spencer Smith fellas. Now that their gaiters, all the black's been redone, and I'm on to the stage where I've noticed that some of them have got white bits missing from their hat lace, which is a bit tiny to try and show. I'm not set up, I haven't got it set up to do kind of micro detailing on this video, but I just take it from me, some of them you can just about see the hat lace on the top of the tricorns there. Some of the white hat lace has gone a bit missing, probably because, let's face it, when people were playing with these over the years, they probably just picked them up like that by their head to move them, because they were individually based during the years of ownership of Charles Grant and Charles Stuart Grant. They were individually based, not multiple based, which is, you know, why I'm going to be multiple basing them after this, to make sure that the individual figures get as little handling as possible, because quite apart from potentially ruining the paintwork, it's also to protect them so that nothing potentially will snap off, because then they can be picked up by the edges of the base or just shoved along with a ruler or whatever if necessary, rather than, you know, big wargamers' fingers coming in from above, grabbing them like that. Of course, the other thing that could potentially happen with figures this age is musket barrels can break off, which is what's happened clearly. If I show you this chap alongside, you can see that at some point its musket has been subjected to unnecessary bending, and as these things are extremely old, probably originally manufactured, most of them in the late 1960s, that plastic, that weird Spencer Smith plastic, can get very brittle indeed. So to protect ankles, to protect muskets, to protect heads and everything else, I'm going to be multiple basing them, for using my own basing method for shot, steel and stone. Also, just, you know, greasy fingers, wargamers' greasy fingers on paint jobs, not necessarily to be recommended. So there we go. Anyway, I've just got a very small brush. What's this? This is what is this brush? This is a life color brush. I've got quite a selection of brushes, because over the years when I was running the magazine, people sent me samples, and a lot of them I've never got around to using. This is a life color 542, and it's an O size, so fairly small, not tiny. I don't think there's a need yet. Maybe for the gaiter buttons I might go down to a double O or something, because they're basically just little tiny blobs and you don't want to overdo those. But for the hat lace, I think this is going to be sufficient. So if I concentrate, woo, there we go. You see, that's what happens when you're not properly concentrating. let's have a go. Let's just do a bit of white along the top edges of the tricorn. And I know that you're going to be saying, I can't really see that, Henry. You're just going to have to take it from me that overall the effect, once all, what was it, 48 guys in the unit have been done, it will look very clean and pretty. So there we are, that's him done. And I've got a bunch more to do. So I will tune back in when they're done. Okay. Welcome back, and as you can now see, the tricorns are looking a lot tidier. I'll also point out that on the command figures, using the heraldic difference, the commanders, so officers, had silver hat lace rather than white, and of course, anyone who knows anything about heraldry will know that silver, argent, is often represented with white in heraldry. And so for the ordinary rank and file, of course, white's the much cheaper alternative than silver lace. So yes, quite correctly, Charles Grant painted the officers with silver. Because, whoa, don't do that, Henry. You're going to be breaking the figures. Sorry, folks. Just shows what a klutz I can be. So, yes, the rank and file get white, while the officers get silver. Anyway, the next thing I'm going to address, you can see here that a lot of the muskets have lost their barrels. They were silver all along the length of their barrels, and they've gone back to bare brown plastic underneath. So that's the next thing I'm going to address, is touching up the muskets where their barrels have gone AWOL. So that's the next thing to do. So I'll tune back in. I won't bore you with actually showing you painting a load of musket barrels, because I think I know, you know what I'm going to be doing now. But that's the next stage, so I'll come back once I've sorted them out. Hi again, everyone. And here's the Ostergotland regiment with the musket barrels now painted up. And I just thought I'd point something out, because one guy, you might have already spotted him in the course of me doing this, one guy had lost the end of his musket completely. It obviously snapped off at some point in the past. But lo and behold, here he is with a musket attached. There's the donor figure. Now, this had been given to me by someone. I'm afraid I can't even remember who it was, but someone gave me some old Spencer Smith figures that they'd found, that they'd got, and said, oh, Henry, you're the Spencer Smith man, perhaps you'd like them, which is lovely. But also, in this instance, wow, this has come in and saved the day, because I've been able to use him as a donor for a musket barrel, and I've attached it using super glue whilst holding my breath for about 2 minutes to get it to stick. And it seems, shall we test it? Yay! It's attached. I mean, obviously I'm not going to apply any major pressure to that, because I wouldn't trust it to hang on. But here we go. The Ostergotland Regiment Musketeer has a new lease of life. So obviously I'm going to, having super glued that, I will do a PVA kind of primer on it, and a bit of an undercoat, and give it a paint up to match his fellows. The other thing I'm doing, having repaired musket barrels, a lot of them have also got bits missing from the wooden stock part, the brown bit of their muskets. So I'm going to be touching those up as well, probably with something that looks like it would probably be something like a Vallejo new wood kind of colour, something like that, or perhaps a leather brown. I'm not sure what Humbrol colour that would have been originally. But anyway, something to match it. I will do a bit of mixing if necessary, so that their muskets are all looking spick and span and smart. And after that, the last thing I'm going to do is check if any of them need that lovely pink facing colour touching up. All right, folks, back again later. So, ladies and gentlemen, here you can see that I have now completely restored the muskets to their former glory. And in fact, the colour I found that matched most closely, almost exactly in fact, was this Foundry Tan 14B. Though I'm sure that originally it was one of the Humbrol range of enamel paints. Though since I gave all mine away a long time ago now, I couldn't tell you exactly which of those Humbrol colours it was, but I suspect it might have been a leather kind of colour. Anyway, they're starting to look quite splendid, aren't they? If I just bring the light around this side of it, you can see that they're looking pretty smart now. So the last job I need to do is just to check whether any of them need any facing colour touching up, and also any gaiter buttons. So I think I'll do the gaiter buttons next with a very small brush, something like a 000, and take it from there. So I'll see you on the other side. Hi folks, nearing the end now of the Ostergotland Infantry's conservation / restoration sessions. They're all nicely painted now. Muskets have been done, repaired and repainted. Ankles have been repaired and repainted. Gaiters, facing colours, hat lace. Lots and lots of bits, but not so much that it's obscured what they originally were and how they came to me. Certainly, they're just hopefully going to be in a much better state to face the next 50 years of their life. As I've said right at the beginning, these were probably cast in the late 1960s. And gosh, so actually they're nearly 60 years old, some of these. Crikey. The mind boggles. Let's see if they'll make it to the century, if I manage to look after them, and then if they get passed on to someone else, so they look after them. Who knows? Anyway, so I've reached sort of closing up to the last stages, really. I've got to base them, and I've got the various multiple bases ready, as you can see here. 6s, 3s, 2s and a few singles, but not very many singles. My rules don't need them. It's just to help casualty removal. Some people prefer not to take figures off the table at all and just put a little dice behind or whatever. That's an option, but I'm going to base them the same as my Regiment von Eintopf has been based, and that's using this combination of 6s, 3s, 2s and 1s. It's just my way. I like to see units actually getting whittled down on the tabletop. Blame Bruce Quarry. That's what I say. Or in fact, blame the original Grant rules, where you did take off individual figures. Lots of dice rolls in melees, that kind of stuff. Anyway, so I'm just going to give them a nice coat of matte varnish. I've got this Vallejo matte varnish here, which I'm just going to apply with a very soft brush. I have got a spray booth and spray paints, but I'm not going to spray, because anyone who does spray varnishing knows that it can be temperamental, depending on the temperature and humidity of the room and that kind of thing, and I don't want to risk that. So I know I can count on good old Vallejo matte varnish to do the trick. You might prefer something like Winsor & Newton's Galleria matte varnish, that kind of thing. It doesn't matter, as long as there's a high quality matte varnish. And that will basically mean that they've got a nice protective coating. This is going to include my now he was originally Le Duc de Gramont in Charles Grant's games. He's now Francois Le Duc de Le Mans. He's a Grand Nuician general now, which seemed appropriate. And here we've got this chap who was the VFS electorate official with his white staff of office, and now he is Andreas Flick, Regeringsinspektor of Borgenmark. So there we are. So he is like a government inspector, and of course we've got the Prince Bishop of Langensalza here, and I think I might just create somewhere called Langensalza, so he can continue as he is. What a wonderful thing this is. This is really encouraging me to get out some of those old Spencer Smiths that I've sort of been given over the years that are sort of surplus to requirements, and do a bit of carving and gluing and sticking and make some of my own Spencer Smith personality figures. I know it's madness, and I know there are some wonderful companies out there making 18th century civilians and that kind of stuff, but because Spencer Smiths are a particular look and feel, it would be nice, wouldn't it, to have more of this sort of chap who would actually sort of fit in with them. So anyway, that's what I'm about to do, and there's no point boring you, taking you through the varnishing process with a soft brush and making sure that I've got, oh yes, just in case, lots and lots of this stuff, kitchen roll on standby. Let's tear off a sheet. I've got into wearing a kind of tradesman's pinafore thing with a nice pocket, and I find this is really useful, first of all, for popping your tissue in a little pocket there. And should you have one of those little minor disasters where you've dropped a figure, very often they end up conveniently tucked inside the pocket rather than somewhere on the floor, on the dusty floor. So I would recommend a kind of a workman's pinafore thing like this to all of you. There you go. Probably available in your local hardware store. Anyway, I'll be back to you after I've done all the varnishing. Cheers. Okay, folks, the varnishing is done, and so now I just need to leave them to dry completely, and then I can set about putting them onto their multiple bases. I hope you'll agree that they're looking pretty blooming good, and I'm very pleased with them. Now, obviously this is a big regiment. I'll be able to use this in my sort of old school format for my shot, steel and stone rules, but some of you would probably think, crikey, there's 2 battalions there, maybe even 3. Well, it's a classic Charles Grant, the war game 48 figure unit, but of course you can do what you like with that. So this would be an old school size of unit. I'd say 48 figures. It's 48 plus the command stand. So you've got the colonel, drummer, standard bearer, and I've got 3 supernumerary officers there. And I'll be talking about whether they can be used in combat or whether they are just to make the thing look pretty, completely supernumerary. The answer is, of course, it's up to you, really. But they look pretty glorious in their original form as a big unit marching across the table. Anyway, there we are. That's the varnishing done. So the next time you'll see me, they'll be on bases, and of course I'll have to paint the bases. Do you know what? Goblin green, old Citadel Goblin green's a pretty good match for what I imagine was probably the Humbrol green colour. Was it Humbrol 80, authentic colour number 80 or something, that was originally used to paint these bases, but to blend them all in together, like I've done with the command figures at the back, I'll be using good old Games Workshop Goblin green. Anyway, there we are, folks. Pretty pleased with these. I'll see you again once they've been based. And welcome back again, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this. This is now the Ostergotland Regiment stuck to its new bases. And so you can see the final configuration of 6s, 3s, 2s and 1s, and I've chosen which figures to put on what sort of bases judiciously. So those figures that I had to repair because they were damaged, I've tucked away mainly in the centre of the back ranks of the 6-figure bases, and so they'll receive absolutely the least handling, I'm hoping, because also, I mean, obviously, as I'll demonstrate here, when you pick up a 6-figure base, you can just pick it up by the edge of the base. And there's, however, as I say, there's some singles in there. You can see the figures that I've checked are sturdiest, and some 2s which enable casualty removal, you know, in odd numbers of casualties, that kind of stuff. So there we are. So the last thing I need to do is to paint the bases, but obviously having just stuck them on with, what have I used? I've used some Yoo-hoo glue, this stuff. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. There's just kind of sticky stuff, and that's just going to take a little while to dry. So I'm going to leave them be for probably a couple of hours at least before I come back and give them a coat of the good old goblin green on the bases, and then they'll be done and ready for action. Right, folks, there they are. The Ostergotland infantry, conserved, repaired, based, and the base is all painted. Yes, a nice plain goblin green, which suits figures of this era, these old Spencer Smiths. Very old school in style. So there you go, that's all the job done. I think the last thing we're going to do, though, is to put these boys on parade, don't you think? Let's go in for a bit of a closer look. Probably the paint on the bases is still a bit damp, so I'm going to leave them for a while, and probably going to wait for some daylight tomorrow before putting them on parade, probably with some of the buildings that I obtained from Charles Grant as well, which would seem to be most appropriate. But there we are, looking splendid and ready for action pretty much. Yeah, these are going to certainly be featuring in my Wars of the Valtinian Succession games, and they're going to be featuring in my explanatory tutorial videos for my Shot, Steel and Stone rules, which of course are on sale at the moment as well. So, see you in a bit, put my teeth in, sorry. See you in a bit for the parade. Oh, and anyone's wondering, yes, that is a regiment of Prunkland's army just tucked in behind there, because doing this repair job has inspired me to do some more of my own Wars of the Valtinian Succession stuff. There you go, that'll feature some other time.